Dawn crept over Mayfair with the pale hesitance of a wounded creature, its first light brushing the frost-laced stones of St. George's and catching on the gold-edged invitations scattered across carriage seats like tokens of a kingdom preparing for coronation. London had risen early, for this was the wedding day of His Grace, the Duke of Ravenshaw, an event the Ton had treated with the reverence of a national holiday. By sunrise, plumes of steam curled from horses' nostrils, pearls glimmered at the throats of arriving guests, and gossip swirled more thickly than the winter mist. Yet beneath the grandeur, beneath the careful choreography of society, a singular tension hung in the air. The Duchess, the discarded Duchess, had returned. Lady Eleanor Harwood stepped from her modest carriage with the grace of someone who had once worn diamonds without fear. Her cloak was simple grey wool, trimmed only at the throat where a worn satin ribbon struggled to hold its shape. She drew it closer around herself, not out of cold, though the morning bit with sharp teeth, but out of habit, a reflex born from years of hiding bruises beneath silk sleeves. No one knew she carried a far more fragile secret now, nestled beneath her heart like a flame sheltered from wind. At 3 months along, her pregnancy remained invisible to all save the trembling awareness she guarded like contraband. The church bells tolled and the sound pressed against her ribs. People turned as she walked the path to the cathedral steps. Recognition flared across powdered faces. Surprise first, then pleasure, then something meaner. A cluster of women, draped in lilac and ivory, whispered behind gloved hands. "How shameless," one murmured. "Imagine appearing here today." Another sighed theatrically. "Perhaps she hopes to reclaim him." Their laughter was brittle, the sort that broke rather than rang. Eleanor kept her chin lifted. She had not come to reclaim anything. Her purpose was singular, steady, and dreadfully simple. Deliver her evidence to the Archbishop before the Duke's vows sealed the lie of their history. Her hands tightened around the small leather folio hidden beneath her cloak. Inside lay testimonies from servants who had dared to speak truth, a physician's letter recounting injuries she had pretended were the result of staircases or clumsiness, and the document that had ended her marriage, one her husband had forged with a confidence born of unchecked power. Only the Archbishop could challenge such fraud. The scent of wax and incense met her at the cathedral doors. She stepped inside and felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders. Stained glass windows threw jeweled light across the marble floor, illuminating guests already seated, already whispering, already judging. She moved as quietly as a memory, hoping to reach the side corridor before anyone dared approach her. But a familiar voice, silk wrapped around steel, cut through the murmurs. "Eleanor." She froze. The Duke stood near the towering cedar pillars, his navy coat immaculate, his posture sculpted from pride. His dark hair gleamed like polished stone, and every movement spoke of a man certain of his dominion. Only his eyes betrayed him. They burned with the flaring panic of a cornered animal. "You should not be here," he said, stepping toward her as though addressing a trespasser in his private estate. "I will not have you disturb what has already been settled." A dozen memories battered her mind. Nights of bruised silence, mornings spent smoothing powder over discoloration, days when her worth was measured by her obedience. But she had not returned for him. She steadied her breath. "I came in peace. I seek only the Archbishop." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "You will hand him nothing." Eleanor angled her body toward the corridor. He moved swiftly, blocking her path. The guests were too distant to hear, and servants had been trained to avoid meeting his gaze. Here, in the dim recess between pillar and wall, she was as alone as she had been in the worst days of their marriage. "What are you hiding?" he hissed. "Some pathetic attempt to tarnish me? You forget, Eleanor, I hold every advantage. I can have you removed from London itself." Her fingers brushed the folio. "I have documents that prove otherwise." His hand shot out faster than her breath could catch. The slap rang through the empty air, sharp, humiliating, absolute. Pain flared across her cheek, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to a single trembling point of light. She braced herself against the wall, gloved fingers splayed against the cold stone. But she did not bow her head. She lifted her gaze slowly, deliberately, until her eyes met his with an expression he had never seen. Quiet defiance, laced with the kind of resolve that grows only in women who have survived disappointment and heartbreak without champions. "You underestimate me," she whispered. His expression faltered. "Whatever you hold over me," she continued, voice steady though her cheek throbbed, "ends today." For the briefest instant, silence hovered between them, thick as velvet. Then the bells outside began again, louder this time, summoning London to witness a ceremony built on deception. Eleanor stepped away from the wall. Her cheek pulsed with heat, but her spine drew straighter than it had in years. Each footfall echoed across the stone floor as she walked past him, refusing to glance back. The pain did not diminish her, it clarified her. She no longer moved like a woman escaping but like one advancing toward a reckoning. The Duke's voice followed her, low and cracking with fury. "I swear if you take one step into that nave you will regret it." She did not break stride. The arches above seemed to breathe with her, lending strength she did not know she possessed. Light spilled across her path from the stained-glass saints, their colors turning the air into fractured rainbows. She touched the folio beneath her cloak one more time. Her heartbeat thudded against it, steady as marching drums. She felt, with a sudden and terrifying clarity, that her life had narrowed to a single choice, silence or truth. At the threshold of the nave she paused. The Duke watched from the shadows behind her, no longer composed, no longer confident. His wedding awaited. His future trembled. Eleanor inhaled the cold cathedral air, tasting candle smoke and consequence. Then, with a whisper only the divine could hear, she said, "Then it shall be today." The nave of St. George's rose before Eleanor like a trembling threshold between the life she had endured and the truth she could no longer hide. With each step she took, the murmuring tide of voices shifted, bending around her presence like wind rippling through a field. People recognized her, some with widened eyes, others with the delighted cruelty of those who savor scandal before breakfast. The air was dense with incense, perfume, and expectation, but beneath it all pulsed an electric discomfort, as if the cathedral itself sensed the fracture she was about to carve into London's most polished morning. She walked with measured grace, though her cheek still burned from the Duke's blow. Her fingers remained pressed against the folio hidden beneath her cloak. It seemed to pulse with her heartbeat, warm and unyielding. Around her, the wedding guests glittered like a living mural, pearls, ostrich plumes, sapphire brooches, silk gloves raised like wings of judgment. But she did not shrink. She had played the part of the silent Duchess long enough. Today she would be her own witness. Halfway down the aisle, she felt a presence at her side, not intrusive, not presumptuous, simply there. She turned slightly and found herself staring into the steady dark eyes of Lord Tristan Hale. He bowed his head in greeting, the gesture subtle enough not to cause comment from the onlookers but reverent enough to convey his allegiance. "Lady Eleanor," he murmured, his voice low enough to keep from echoing through the vaulted space. "May I walk with you?" Her breath caught, not from fear but from the unexpected comfort that threaded through his tone. She did not know him well. Their meetings in past seasons had been fleeting, polite, and always under the watchful gaze of her husband. Tristan had been kind then, though distant. A man whose integrity had earned him quiet respect rather than noisy admiration. Yet now, as she stood in the heart of danger, he was the only soul who stepped toward rather than away from her. "You should not involve yourself," she whispered. "This is not your burden." "That strike you received," he replied, his eyes flicking briefly toward her cheek, "was not my burden either, yet I witnessed its aftermath in your eyes. Allow me at least to stand nearby. No more than that unless you wish it." His words settled over her like a shawl woven from sincerity. She inclined her head. "Very well." They resumed walking, moving with the solemnity of two figures in a painting. But Tristan's presence created a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Whispers rippled through the pews, curiosity, astonishment, disapproval. Eleanor felt none of it. Instead, she felt her spine lengthen, her breath deepen. Strength, quiet but firm, returned to her limbs. Near the chancel door, a small carved table held the wedding registry book. The ink pots gleamed beside goosefeather quills arranged neatly in a silver cup. Eleanor hesitated, then pressed her palm against the door leading to the Archbishop's chambers. A guard, startled by her intent, stepped forward. "My lady, this is not." Tristan's voice carried the weight of a man who expected obedience. "Stand aside. Lady Eleanor has the Archbishop's business." The guard obeyed before he realized he had complied. Inside, the room was lit only by two slender tapers, their flames wavering as if straining to hear confessions. The Archbishop, a tall, solemn man whose beard was streaked with snow-white strands, glanced up from a stack of parchment. His expression flickered from bewilderment to dread recognition. "Lady Eleanor," he said softly, "this is highly irregular." "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," she whispered, stepping forward until she stood within the circle of candlelight. "But I can no longer permit a falsehood to anchor itself in God's house." She withdrew the folio and placed it before him. The Archbishop did not open it immediately. He studied her face first, his eyes filled with a gentleness she had not expected. Then, with deliberate care, he unfolded the leather flap. As he read the first document, his eyebrows drew together. By the third, his breath trembled. And when he reached the fourth, the forged annulment with its imitation of his own ceremonial seal, his face drained of color. "This is grave indeed," he said, voice rasping like old parchment. "If these claims are true—" "They are not claims," Eleanor interrupted. She braced her hands on the table, her voice steady. "They are truths concealed beneath gilded lies. And they have shaped my life more cruelly than any whisper spoken about me in society." Tristan stood near the door, silent but resolute, his presence an anchor in the shifting storm. The archbishop rubbed his temples. "This will provoke scandal, perhaps ruin. You understand the weight of what you bring?" "Yes," Eleanor answered. "At last I understand it completely." Before either of them could speak further, a heavy thud sounded in the nave outside. The murmurs grew louder. Someone shouted. The cathedral's peace fractured like a shattered chalice. Tristan moved instinctively to guard the entrance, but the door burst open before he reached it. The Duke strode in, fury etched into every line of his face. His hair, once flawlessly styled, now curled with the wildness of a man whose composure had begun to leak away. Behind him, two servants hovered uncertainly, uncertain whether to intervene or flee. "You dare," he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Eleanor. "You dare intercept my wedding with, what? Pathetic accusations? Stale distortions? Lies crafted to frighten feeble minds?" Eleanor did not step back. The archbishop rose, lifting the folio from the table. "These are not lies," he declared, his voice ringing through the small chamber. "Your Grace, the documentation before me is deeply troubling." The Duke's eyes gleamed with a dangerous brightness. "Do not test me with theatrics. My wedding begins within minutes. London waits. The crown expects my presence." His tone cracked. "I will not be made a spectacle." "You have already made one," Tristan said quietly, stepping between him and Eleanor. For a heartbeat, time halted. The Duke stared at Tristan, then laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "You? A man who lurks in shadows and mourns a wife gone these 3 years? Spare me your chivalry. It reeks of sentiment." Tristan did not flinch. Better sentiment than cowardice. A collective inhale filled the room. The archbishop's jaw tightened. Eleanor felt the tremor of danger vibrating through the air, but fear no longer consumed her. She had expected confrontation. She had not expected, however, that someone would speak for her with quiet ferocity. The Duke stepped closer to her, the muscles in his neck coiling. "You will give me that folio, Eleanor?" She shook her head. "No." His hand lifted. Whether in anger or threat she would never know. Tristan seized his wrist before the motion could complete. The Duke snarled. "Unhand me." Tristan's voice dropped to a tone that seemed carved from ancient stone. "If you raise your hand to her again, Your Grace, you shall find the consequences far heavier than mere documentation." The archbishop raised a commanding palm. "Enough. This matter has surpassed private dispute. It concerns legal fraud, marital violation, and the sanctity of ecclesiastical authority." His gaze pinned the Duke in place. "We go to the nave. The truth shall be heard where it cannot be whispered away." The Duke paled. Eleanor's heart pounded, not from fear, but from a clarity that burned through her body like winter sunlight. Tristan opened the door for her. The murmurs outside swelled into a storm of gasps as she emerged from the chamber, carrying her dignity like an heirloom reclaimed after years of abandonment. She glanced back once at the Duke. For the first time in their marriage he looked afraid. The archbishop motioned for her to step forward, toward the center of the cathedral, toward the place where vows were supposed to be made, not broken. As Eleanor walked, every eye followed her. Judgment, pity, admiration. They collided in the air like shards of stained glass. The hour of revelation had come. And as the bells tolled again, echoing through the vaulted arches, she felt her child flutter for the first time. A tiny, trembling spark of life reminding her that she was no longer fighting only for herself. She laid a hand against her abdomen, breath catching. Her secret had chosen this very moment to reveal itself. The murmurs in the nave swelled like gathering thunder as Eleanor stepped into the center aisle, the archbishop just behind her and Tristan a steadfast shadow at her back. Dozens of heads turned, jewels flashing beneath the chandeliers, feathers trembling atop fashionable bonnets. The atmosphere had shifted since she first entered the cathedral. What had been idle curiosity was now sharp, crackling expectation. Everyone felt the tremor of something unprecedented, though none yet understood its magnitude. Eleanor's palm still rested lightly against her abdomen. The flutter she had felt, a delicate brush like wings against the inside of her being, remained vivid, almost luminous. It steadied her, though she dared not dwell on it long, for the Duke stood at the far end of the nave, pale with fury, his bride-to-be frozen beside him like a marble figure carved into astonishment. He stared at Eleanor as though she were an apparition risen from the dead rather than the woman he had used, discarded, and expected the world to forget. Tristan moved slightly closer, his presence as protective as a cloak, though he kept a respectful distance. The soft scrape of his boots on the stone floor was the only sound until the Archbishop raised his hand, calling for silence. It fell instantly, rippling through the room like a curtain descending. Before this ceremony proceeds, the Archbishop declared, a matter of grave importance must be addressed. A ripple of alarm passed through the guests. The bride's mother clutched her pearls. The Duke tensed as though preparing for battle. Eleanor inhaled, then stepped forward. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but unwavering. I bring before you the truth of my marriage, a truth hidden beneath forged documents and false claims. The Duke's voice cracked across the nave. Enough of this spectacle. Eleanor, you will leave or I shall. You shall do nothing, Tristan interrupted, his tone more measured than his words. You forfeited your right to command her the moment you raised your hand to her. A gasp swept the pews. The heiress's father shot to his feet. Is this true? The Duke sneered. A private marital dispute, exaggerated by a vindictive woman and a widower who seeks entertainment in drama. Eleanor lifted her chin. The burn still flickered across her cheek, but she felt none of its humiliation now. I have evidence, she said softly, and I have nothing left to lose. The Archbishop opened the folio she had provided, his voice steady as he read aloud the testimonies of her former maid, the butler who had resigned in disgust, and the physician who had treated injuries she could never explain in public. Each sentence seemed to hang in the air like smoke, impossible to disperse. The Duke shifted his weight, a muscle leaping in his jaw, but he could not interrupt the cascade of truth. Some guests whispered prayers beneath their breath. Others watched with morbid fascination, as though witnessing the fall of Rome rather than a scandal in Mayfair. When the Archbishop read the forged annulment papers, the cathedral erupted. A dozen voices protested. The bride's mother fainted. The bride herself took a single step away from the Duke, her youthful face contorted into something very much like terror. Your Grace, the Archbishop said, turning toward the Duke, do you deny the contents of this documentation? The Duke's voice wavered. The papers were presented to me exactly as they appear now. You expect us to believe, Tristan said quietly, that the seal of the Church was forged without your awareness? That testimony after testimony coincidentally aligns against your character. The Duke glared at him with such venom that even the candles seemed to flicker. Stay out of matters that do not concern you. Tristan's gaze did not waver. She concerns me. The words, spoken without flourish, struck Eleanor deeper than any ornate declaration could have. They resonated in the hollow spaces where she had once stored fear. The Duke, seeing the shifting tide, lunged forward as though he could seize the narrative by force. His hand lifted, not quite touching her, but close enough that the intent radiated from him like heat. Before he could reach her, Tristan stepped between them, one hand raised in silent warning. Do not, he said softly, shame yourself further. The Duke's bride whimpered. Her father seized her arm, pulling her back, his face draining of color as he understood that his daughter had nearly married a man capable of violence under the gaze of God and London alike. Eleanor's heart pounded, not with fear, but with the strange, steadying certainty that life had shifted at last. She turned toward the Archbishop. I ask for ecclesiastical protection, she said, for myself and for the child I carry. Gasps burst like firecrackers. Even Tristan stiffened involuntarily, though his expression remained gentle when he looked at her. The Duke's face contorted into something grotesque, a mask of rage and panic. You dare claim, he sputtered. You dare implicate. The Archbishop silenced him with a single authoritative gesture. The claim is not yours to dismiss. Lady Eleanor, step forward. She obeyed, her breath trembling as she crossed the final distance to the altar. She felt suddenly lighter, as though each step lifted the weight her marriage had placed upon her shoulders. By the authority granted to me, the Archbishop said, I invoke the Crown's guardianship over Lady Eleanor Harwood until a formal inquiry determines the validity of these documents and the circumstances of her alleged annulment. The Duke's cry was half protest, half despair. You cannot. This is my wedding day. Then perhaps you should have built it upon truth, Eleanor replied, her voice soft but echoing nonetheless. A profound hush fell over the cathedral. Snow drifted past the high stained-glass windows, glowing like ash in a sacred fire. The tension in the nave tightened, then began to unravel as nobles shifted away from the Duke, creating islands of distance around him. Eleanor felt her strength falter for the first time since she had entered the church. The enormity of what she had done, what she had revealed, settled over her like a mantle too heavy for ordinary shoulders. Her fingers trembled. Her vision blurred for a heartbeat. Tristan saw it instantly. He stepped closer, speaking softly enough for only her to hear. "Lean on me if you must. You have stood alone long enough." The gentle offer nearly undid her. She steadied herself with a slow breath, but she allowed her arm to brush his for the briefest moment, drawing courage from the contact. The Duke, now cornered, resorted to desperation. "This is not finished. I will appeal to the House of Lords. I will." But his voice was drowned by the sound of the bride's father announcing, "The engagement is dissolved. My daughter will not be wed to a man under investigation for fraud and brutality." Chaos rippled outward. Guests began to rise, their chatter swelling into a tide of scandal that would sweep across London before nightfall. Yet even amid the commotion, Eleanor felt strangely insulated, as though a quiet pocket of air held her apart from the noise. "You must come with us now," the Archbishop said gently. "You are not safe in his presence." Eleanor nodded. Tristan offered his hand, not demanded, not assumed, simply offered. She hesitated only a moment before placing her fingers against his palm. His touch was warm, steadying. They turned toward the grand doors of the cathedral. But before Eleanor reached them, she looked back and saw the Duke watching her with a fury so silent it chilled her marrow. His world had cracked open. His reputation had crumbled. And she knew, with a certainty that tightened her breath, that such a man would not surrender ruin quietly. The Duke's final whisper reached her, thin as a blade sliding from its sheath. "This is war, Eleanor." The cathedral doors opened, spilling winter sunlight across the floor, and she stepped forward, straight into the beginning of that war. Snow spiraled through the open cathedral doors like pale threads pulled from the sky's unraveling hem, drifting across the threshold where Eleanor paused. Behind her, the nave roared with scandal, protests, and frantic rearrangements of ruined expectations. But as she stepped from the sacred shadow of St. George's into the sharp winter air, the world seemed to hush, as though London itself held its breath at what had just transpired. The Duke's threat lingered in her ears. "This is war," spoken not with desperation but with the practiced cruelty of a man who had never been denied anything of consequence. Tristan walked beside her, not touching, yet close enough that his presence warmed the cold edges of her fear. The Archbishop followed, his steps heavy with the gravity of the charge he now assumed. A modest carriage bearing the church's crest awaited at the base of the steps, its horses stamping clouds of breath into the brittle morning. Eleanor felt her strength falter as she descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last as adrenaline faded and her limbs remembered exhaustion. "Lean on me," Tristan murmured, offering his arm with the quiet certainty of a man who understood both her pride and her limits. For a moment she hesitated. Then her fingers curled around his sleeve, light as a whisper, but enough for him to steady her. They walked the remaining steps in a silence more intimate than words. Her cheek still throbbed faintly where the Duke's hand had landed, yet she no longer felt the sting of humiliation, only the triumph of having spoken a truth she once believed would die with her. As Tristan helped her into the carriage, a sudden chorus of whispers rose from the gathering crowd. London's elite spilled from the cathedral doors in a flurry of silk and indignation. Some stared at Eleanor with thinly veiled pity, others with spite, but many regarded her with a dawning reverence, as though they had witnessed something rare and unsettling, a woman choosing truth over survival. The Archbishop climbed in opposite her. Tristan paused at the door, uncertainty flickering across his expression. "Shall I accompany you?" he asked, though his posture betrayed how deeply he wished to. Eleanor swallowed, her heartbeat skittering in the fragile quiet. "You need not trouble yourself further, my lord. You have done more than most would dare." "Trouble?" His voice softened, unraveling slightly. "I would call it purpose." The words warmed her more than she wished to admit. Still, she forced her breath steady. "I will be safe under the church's protection." His jaw tightened. Safe from him? For now. But the Duke is not a man who yields. His eyes held hers with a fierce sincerity. "If ever you need me, send word." She nodded once, scarcely trusting her own voice. Then the carriage door closed, cutting the connection like a candle snuffed by a sudden draft. Tristan stepped back, watching as the carriage rolled away, his silhouette a stark figure against the pale morning light. Eleanor turned her face toward the window, watching the cathedral fade behind her. Streets blurred past, carriages, lamplighters, shopkeepers sweeping snow from their stoops, yet she felt suspended, caught between the wreckage of her past and the uncertain promise of her future. The archbishop sat in contemplative silence, hands folded in his lap. "You showed great bravery today," he finally said. "Bravery," she echoed softly, her gaze drifting over the frost-kissed rooftops. "Or desperation." "There is little difference," he replied, "when one must reclaim one's soul." The truth of his words settled over her like a cloak. She pressed a hand against her abdomen, feeling again the faint flutter that had accompanied her stand in the cathedral. A child. A life untouched by deceit. The memory steadied her. The carriage arrived at Lambeth House, a residence reserved for those under ecclesiastical protection. Eleanor was led inside, her cloak removed by a kindly matron who ushered her toward a sitting room warmed by a crackling fire. The archbishop spoke with her for several minutes, explaining the legal inquiry to come, the testimony she would need to give, and the potential ramifications for the duke's title and estates. She listened with the calm of someone who had weathered storms far more violent. Yet beneath her composure, a subtle tremor of loneliness stirred. For the first time since leaving the cathedral, she wondered what Tristan was doing now, whether he stood outside St. George's amid the wreckage of a ceremony never completed, or whether he too had felt the strange moment of connection that flickered between them like a candle flame protected from wind. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. The matron entered with a tray of broth and bread, urging her to eat, but Eleanor's appetite fluttered weakly. She sipped only a little before rising to stand near the window overlooking the Thames. The river glimmered beneath the pale winter sun, moving with quiet persistence, neither hurried nor still but resolute. She envied its certainty. Her reflection in the glass startled her. She looked both older and younger than she remembered, freed from pretense, yet burdened by truth. A bruise darkened her cheekbone, a cruel echo of the duke's final attempt to imprison her in silence. She touched the swelling lightly. The pain was still there, but dulled now by the knowledge that hundreds had seen the man he truly was. The matron returned moments later with an envelope. "A message arrived for you," she said, offering it gently. Eleanor accepted it with cautious curiosity. The seal was unmarked, pressed in simple wax. Inside lay a single sheet of parchment with a handwritten line. "If the night grows long or fear grows heavy, send for me." Ditch. Her breath hitched. The simplicity of it, the sincerity, struck deeper than she expected. She folded the note carefully, tucking it into the pocket of her gown as though it were something fragile and precious. Evening descended, gilding the river in amber light as Eleanor settled near the fire. Her thoughts drifted between exhaustion and unexpected peace. She felt safer than she had in years, but not entirely untouched by the duke's vow. He would not accept ruin quietly. His pride was a living thing, sharp-edged and hungry. The fire crackled softly, its warmth coaxing her into uneasy drowsiness. She drifted between waking and sleep until a distant sound pierced her fragile calm. A carriage stopping outside, its wheels grinding over snow. Her eyes flew open. Footsteps approached the corridor. Firm. Unhurried. The matron hurried past the sitting room, her whisper urgent. "My lord, she is resting." But a familiar voice answered, steady and low. "I will not intrude. I only wish to ensure she is unharmed." Eleanor rose, heart quickening. Tristan Hale stood at the doorway, snow melting in his dark hair, eyes burning with something she could not yet name. And for the first time since her marriage shattered, she felt something bloom inside her. Not fear, not desperation, but a fragile, trembling hope. Tristan's presence in the doorway felt like a breath of warm air drifting into a room long sealed from sunlight. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment, suspended between disbelief and a strange, fragile yearning she had not recognized until that very instant. Snowflakes clung to his dark coat and melted into darkened threads. His eyes, steady and searching, held none of the judgment she had learned to expect from men of rank. Instead they held concern, quiet, unwavering, painfully sincere. "I should not have come unannounced," Tristan said softly, inclining his head. "But I could not rest knowing how violently this day ended for you." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the back of the chair she had risen from. "I did not expect anyone to follow me here. Least of all you." A faint smile touched his expression, not of amusement but of something gentler, an understanding forged not through shared past but through shared truths. "There are moments," he replied, "when propriety must step aside for humanity." His gaze flicked briefly to her cheek, where the bruise had darkened to a muted plum. His voice lowered. "I needed to see for myself that you were safe." Safe. The word echoed inside her like a foreign melody. For years, safety had been a luxury she tasted only in rare moments. A quiet night, a closed door, a fleeting hour when the Duke's temper cooled. Now it existed not as a moment, but as a man standing before her with his hat in hand and snow melting at his boots. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt to steady it. "Today has been heavier than I imagined." "You carried it with remarkable grace," Tristan said. "Few could stand where you did and remain upright." Eleanor looked away, overwhelmed by a sudden sweep of emotion. "I did not feel graceful. Only resolute." "That is a finer thing," he murmured. "For grace is often inherited. But resolve, that is forged." Silence drifted between them like slow-falling ash. The fire crackled. The river outside shifted with the wind. Eleanor felt her pulse begin to calm in Tristan's presence, as though the chaos of the day had been contained simply by his arrival. "Will you sit?" she asked gently. He did, though he chose a chair nearer the fire, perhaps to give her space, perhaps because the warmth served as a neutral ground between them. Eleanor resumed her seat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. For a long moment he said nothing, studying the flames as though gathering courage. "Eleanor," he began carefully, "the Duke's threat was not idle. He has influence, allies, and a reputation he will attempt to resurrect through force if necessary. The inquiry may protect you in matters of law, but not in matters of pride. He may seek other avenues to discredit you." Her heartbeat quickened. "Other avenues?" "He may fabricate witnesses. He may circulate false letters. He may appeal to those who fear scandal more than truth." The room seemed to tilt slightly, though she kept her expression composed. "I have no strength left for another war." "You have more than you believe," Tristan said. "But strength does not require solitude. Let someone bear a portion of it." Her breath slowed. "Someone?" He met her gaze with a steadiness that tightened her chest. "Allow me to stand with you, Eleanor. If not for affection, then for justice." Affection. He had spoken the word without flinching. Yet he did not speak it with entitlement or demand. It flowed from him like a quiet confession he had withheld for propriety's sake. "I hardly know what to say," she murmured. "Then say nothing," he replied. "Only know that you are not alone." A log split in the fireplace, sending sparks into the air. The sound startled her more than it should have, and Tristan rose instinctively, taking a slow step toward her as though fearing she might collapse under the day's weight. She did not retreat. Instead, she lifted her eyes to him. "When I married the Duke, I believed obedience was survival. I believed silence was wisdom. I believed endurance was strength. Today showed me how wrong I was." Her voice trembled. "Yet now that I have spoken, I do not know who I am." "You are becoming," Tristan said softly. "And that is a far braver thing." Eleanor felt something inside her shift. An ember of emotion sparked into a fragile flame. She knew he spoke not like a historian recounting her courage but like a man witnessing it with awe. The matron entered then, carrying a folded blanket, but froze the moment she sensed the charged air between them. She bowed politely and retreated, closing the door with delicate care. Tristan took one more step, close enough that she could see the snow still melting on his lashes. "There is something else you should know," he said quietly. "The inquiry has already begun. And several nobles have privately expressed their willingness to testify on your behalf. Your courage today freed others to speak." Her breath caught. "Others?" "Yes." A shadow crossed his expression. "You were not the first woman he wronged. Only the first who dared to expose him." A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of vindication that softened the jagged edges of her past. "I thought I suffered alone." "You suffered in silence," Tristan replied. "But you were never alone." A tear slipped down her cheek. She brushed it away quickly, embarrassed. He reached into his coat, retrieving the silk handkerchief he had given her earlier that day. He placed it gently on the arm of her chair, not daring to assume he could touch her again. "I meant what I said this morning," he murmured. "Your courage shames every man who ever claimed honor." She lifted the handkerchief with trembling fingers, the embroidered crest catching the firelight. "You have been kinder to me in a single day than my husband was in our entire marriage." A storm of emotion flickered through Tristan's eyes, pain, fury, tenderness. Then he was a fool beyond measure. Eleanor exhaled slowly, letting the warmth of the fire seep into her bones. "What happens now?" "What must happen?" Tristan said. "You will give your testimony." The crown will decide the fate of his title. London will choose what to believe. He paused. And I will remain wherever I am needed. Her heart trembled. And if I need more than protection? His breath hitched almost imperceptibly. Then I will give more than protection. The fire glowed brighter, illuminating the space between them with a golden, trembling light. Eleanor felt the moment shift, delicate and monumental, as though the world had opened a door she never dared imagine existed. A sudden knock struck the silence. The matron hurried back in breathless. "My lady," she whispered urgently, "a messenger from the Duke has arrived at the gates. He demands entry." Eleanor's pulse stopped. Tristan turned toward the door, his expression sharpening into something fierce and unyielding. "Stay behind me," he said. And with those 4 words, the war the Duke had promised found its way to her doorstep, yet she no longer faced it alone.